I would like to invite Mr. Andrew De Rosa to talk his presentations.
I want us to talk about something somewhat different, but while we have been having this discussion today, I think the two things I'd like to talk about in the short time I have available are really these things. That whilst Singapore has been a global leader producing or complying with the FT, well, we just heard of the implementation of the requirements under the Tobacco Framework Convention. So Singapore has done a great job, and they have really gone all out with tobacco control, and that has resulted in an amazing reduction in smoking prevalence. So tobacco control works. The traditional tobacco control works, and Singapore is a great example of that. But it only goes so far. Tobacco control has kind of reached a ceiling in those countries, or effectiveness ceiling in those countries which have implemented it. It has reduced, for sure it's reduced prevalence, but it's reduced prevalence to round about 13, 14, 15%, and there it is stuck. Completely stuck. No matter what else countries do with tobacco control, they cannot get it below those 16, 15, 14, 13% prevalences. They just can't. And I mean, Australia is an example because they've done absolutely everything. They've got plain packaging, they've got sky-high taxes, and still, they're absolutely stuck. So, here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking this. I'm thinking that Singapore has got nowhere to go now. It's implementing new things. For example, it's increasing the minimum age, or the minimum age of smoking from 18 to 21. It may or may not get embroiled in the litigation over plain packaging and stop plain packaging. But basically, it's about as far as it can go. So, do we continue as Singapore and try and just do better, work harder, and get those incremental 1% every now and then? Or do we say to ourselves, hey, 13%, 12%, 14%, that's thousands of people a year dying unnecessarily. So why don't we do better than that? Why don't we do better than the 1%? Now here's a message for Indonesia. Singapore and all these other countries that have implemented tobacco controls assiduously have taken years and years to get from their 25% down to their 13, 14, 15%. They've taken years and lots of money. It's cost the government a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort, and I think Indonesia can leapfrog, because this technology we've been talking about today is leapfrog technology. It's the kind of technology that exists or existed in the telecommunications industry. When I was going to China regularly in the 80s, it took 2.5 years to get a landline. So now, I think it's like 2 or 3 phones per person in China enables a totally different kind of communication. And I think this is where we are today, here in Indonesia. Indonesia has got, in the male population, 60-65% smoking prevalence. Indonesia does not have to spend all the time and all the effort needed to bring it down in the same way other countries have over the last 20 or 30 years by using ordinary tobacco control methods. Indonesia can immediately halve. When I say immediately, I mean over a period of just a few years, halve their smoking prevalence by going with this new technology. They do not have to go the route of Singapore and then get stuck at 13%. Instead, they can go the route of the new technology that is out there now and technology that's being developed and get down to these very low levels within a few years. So that's kind of my contention. Now, let me just skip through some of these slides because they're available for you if you'd like them. They don't really say more than I've just said. What I would like to point out. Sorry, I'm not sure why the mic keeps turning on and off. I apologize. But I would like to point out something here that's quite interesting. We talked a little bit earlier about what is the Singapore government going to do to bring down current performance levels. Stated policies are to do these things, which is basically harder, increased duties and plain packaging and so on. But I think what we're missing here is we're really missing in Singapore this notion that smoking is a national crisis. It's the concepts in Singapore amongst the government are that smokers are immoral, they're weak, and therefore we should not be helping them by giving them nicotine, which is what they want. We shouldn't be helping them with a leisure product. That's the concept. So it's a very puritanical concept. In order to address that puritanical concept, we have to do probably the exact opposite of what Professor Faustino was talking about, which is to make it a disease. Because whilst tobacco smoking is a disease, we can edge around this concept that tobacco smoking is somehow immoral or a weakness. Once we get it into the disease category, we can then have a solution. That's a medical solution that saves the government's face, the current government's face, and allows them to introduce e-cigarettes and heat-not-burn products without, in a saving manner. And then a diversion of those products will enable those who need them to get them. So that's kind of where I am on that thought. Now, a couple of other things occurred to me. I was asked to talk about the gaps in the current research. And actually, there's not a lot of gaps in the current research. I mean, the big gaps in the current research are really just longevity of research. In other words, that we need to see results over a much longer period if we are to satisfy some of the doubters. So it's longevity, really. But here's some research ideas that I'm wondering whether they might be helpful with the regulators. One is, what about the relative dependence of conventional cigarettes versus reduced-risk products? And this idea that maybe if we knew how addictive each of them are, we could make a case that, well, reduced-risk products at least move more easily to abstinence. Abstinence from nicotine, abstinence from anything. Perhaps that's helpful. Perhaps it's also helpful to talk about, have more research, and this is longevity really, about the efficacy and effectiveness of reduced-risk products versus NRTs. Now there is research on this. The meta-analysis that was looked at these studies, all of these studies, said, well, the evidence is weak because there are only 2 studies that fit the profile of the researchers, and they were looking at long-term effects. So nicotine replacement therapy versus e-cigarettes, for example. So there is still room to show that e-cigarettes are more effective, simply because they were the old products, the old nicotine, the old e-cigarettes with nicotine products, and things like that. So there is some area there that we could look at. And then use of the device for hard drugs. This seems to be the thing that's gotten really into vogue in Malaysia and in Singapore, that somehow these e-cigarette devices can be used for hard drugs. And I think some research around that might be helpful, simply because a piece of tin foil can be used for hard drugs, a pipe can be used for hard drugs, a piece of paper can be used for hard drugs. Why on earth are we so worried about e-cigarettes being used for hard drugs? Absurd. But nonetheless, if the government wants to go that way, maybe we could go that way too, and look at how these things could be turned into being used for hard drugs. And is anyone doing that? Because it's a real pain to try to want to turn one of these things into something you can use for hard drugs. It's really not that easy. So that might be an area of fruitful research, I'm not sure. I think the only other thing I'd like to talk about is this idea that using these products are a lifestyle choice, and whether we go that way or don't go that way. It's true that these things are a lifestyle. choice. But I do believe that they're a lifestyle choice only once they're in a safe or safer delivery mechanism. So, tobacco, burning tobacco and inhaling tobacco smoke, to me is not a lifestyle choice, that's an addiction. It's damaging, it's hugely damaging, and the damage is defined in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders as being an addiction. But once you have a safe delivery of nicotine, there, I think, absolutely, here we're talking about lifestyle choice. And I think we all hit it very well. I think almost all the presenters talked about this idea that the safe delivery of nicotine has to be attractive to smokers. And it's attractive in different ways. It's attractive because, for example, of the sensations. It's attractive because of nicotine. It's attractive because there's a social element involved in it. But it's also attractive because it's not shaming. I think this is really crucial. As a therapist, to me, the beauty of these new products, these new technologies, are that people can now use them with pride. Smokers are shamed again and again. It's depressing to be a smoker. It's a huge pressure to be a smoker. But here are some devices where, once again, smokers can rise from the ashes and be proud of what they're doing. They don't have to feel ashamed. They don't have to feel shame. And then it becomes a very obvious lifestyle choice. So those are the thoughts that I had. I'll pass it back to the others. Thanks.
Good afternoon. We would like to present about the Philippine overview on the use of the electronic cigarette smoking and its initial roadmap on its research. I am Mr. Jay Hasul from the University of Santo Tomas Faculty of Pharmacy, together with my co-presenter, Mr. Ron Christian Sison. The current situation in the Philippines, the Executive Order number 26 signed by our President, Rodrigo Duterte, last May 2017, forbids the use of tobacco. Unfortunately, the initial announcement stated that electronic cigarette was included in the ban of these tobacco, in the banning of these smoking activities. There's a restriction of in all public spaces, even sidewalks, to the new order, and tobacco cannot be sold within 100 meters or about 330 feet in schools, playgrounds, or anywhere children might gather. The municipalities must also designate smoking areas. That would also include the utilization of the electronic cigarettes from these restricted areas. But fortunately, there's a negotiation deck in the Congress of the Philippines stating the adoption of electronic cigarettes as one of the effective tool in harm reduction program. And based on the statement, it also includes the definition on the tobacco control and at the same time the appropriate definition of the harm reduction. It also stated the possible or the recommended regulatory framework provided by our expert who advocates the use of the electronic cigarettes. And based on the final statement, it really encourages the Department of Health, our Department of Health, to adopt the use of electronic cigarettes as an alternative for smokers as part of its national tobacco control strategy. In relation to this, we would like to present the local studies. Here is my co-presenter, Mr. Ron Christian Sison, who will discuss about the association of total urinary NNAL levels to the tobacco exposure among current Filipino smoker aged 18 to 25 years old.
Again, good afternoon. I'm Ron Christian Sison and I'm from the Philippines, and I'm teaching at the University of Santo Tomas, teaching clinical pathology subjects, and by profession, I'm a medical technologist. So the study is all about, for a fact that we work on clinical laboratories, and we're after studying body fluids and coming up with various means to associate an exposure and outcome based on different analysis in the laboratory. And coming up with the literature that we had, together with my students here on their left side, were my research students who graduated June of this year, who had studied about one particular biomarker in the urine of the Filipino smokers aged 18 to 25. Smoking is one of the most popular vices in the world, and it's been considered about 28% or approximately 17.8 million of the Filipino populations are already smokers. This requires the use of cigarettes which contain nicotine. Both can be popular in the Philippines for both males and females. And it's been associated to millions of mortalities in the Philippines and of course cancers and pulmonary diseases. Squamous metaplasia, as observed to most of the associated outcomes to the people who are exposed to cigarette smoking, is translated into the transformation of the bronchial epithelium due to the toxic irritation induced by cigarette smoking. This is also referred to as a complex process in which could lead to abnormal growth of the lung tissue, an example of which is bronchial carcinoma. Initially, the basal cells, as we can see in here, within the pseudostratified epithelium become hyper-proliferative. During the next stage of the process, the epithelium begins to express markers of the squamous phenotype rather than those of the usual pseudostratified epithelium. Finally, once these cells are fully differentiated, having a squamous cell morphology, instead of initial pseudostratified columnar cell morphology, cells will express protein involucrin, a specific marker in the squamous differentiation. If the squamous metaplasia, as we have seen in here, have not yet progressed too far, some of which will be transformed into abnormal epithelium and may return to normal. So there is, based on literature, we've seen that there is it will revert back to normal after undergone specific histopathology changes, once the patient has already started on smoking cessation. So cigarette smoking contains over around 4,500 chemicals with 70 established as carcinogens, one of which will fall under the N, nitrosamine called nicotine-derived nitrosamine ketone, or we refer to as the N and K, or otherwise known as 4-methyl nitrosamino 1,3-pyridyl-1-butanone, and it's one of the key components in a vital role in carcinogenesis in the lungs of patients who have been exposed to cigarette smoking. This is occasionally found relatively high amounts among those of the total tobacco products. Upon entering the body, the substance enters two possible metabolic pathways. One pathway produces a metabolite known as the 4-methyl nitrosamino 1,3-pyridyl-1-butanol, or the NNAL for short. It is considered as one of the very important biomarker for NNK uptake found in urine of smokers. Furthermore, it can play a role in the risk factor for the development of lung cancer discovered by the enantiomers NNAL. There are two enantiomers that were discovered, the R-NNAL and the L-NNAL, that is associated to DNA damage done by these substances in the organs, specifically the lungs and the pancreas. Formation of the mutant genes of these cells due to DNA damage could lead to lung cancer and pancreatic cancer. Moreover, among the causes of increasing deaths, cigarette smoking is one of the biggest risk factors. According to the WHO report, that approximately 70% of lung cancer deaths and 30% of pancreatic cancers are associated with cigarette smoking. So the study would work on a general problem we're in. What is the correlation of the cigarette exposure to the levels of the identified biomarkers associated to lung cancer among those who have been exposed to cigarette smoking among Filipino cigarette smokers aged 18 to 25? Specifically, what is the relationship of the pack years among current tobacco cigarette smokers and the total NNAL levels in the urine? How does environmental tobacco exposure affect the urinary outcome of the total NNAL levels for non-smokers? And do the levels of total NNAL manifest any signs or symptoms that may be associated with chronic smoking? And lastly, what are the baseline values for NNAL for smokers and non-smokers in the Philippines? So in our conceptual framework, it has been stated by Weiner et al. That NNK is considered one of the most effective and abundant pro-carcinogens found in tobacco. Through their study, the NNK was established to induce lung adenocarcinoma. So the research done by Weiner et al., approximately around 1.8 milligrams of NNK per kilogram of body weight is needed by rats to induce tumors, which is equivalent to 1.6 milligrams of NNK of body weight for typical American smokers of 50 years old with 2 packs of daily intake or exposure to cigarette smoking. Furthermore, NNAL levels was found significantly higher in the urine among older respondents, females, and those with greater cigarette consumption. There is a continuous mutation occurring and may induce lung cancer. Individuals stop smoking, levels of urinary NNAL also decreases. Mutagenesis of the lung stops, and mutated genes will go back to its normal form. but not all cells will be reverting back to normal. After 25 to 35 years of not smoking, the risk of having lung cancer also decreases. This proves that NNAL is a truly significant urinary metabolite rooted from NNK, a substance that is found in almost every tobacco product. This ensures the relationship between pack years and the NNAL levels that is indeed directly proportional with each other. NNK and its metabolite NNAL induce pulmonary tumors in rats, mice, hamsters, independent of the route of administration. The lung tumorigenicity is particularly strong among the rats. So we believe that our study would benefit the general public because smoking is considered to be one of the deadliest vices in the world, and it causes around a mortality of 5.4 million people around the world. It has been also considered as one of the biggest risk factors for developing two of the deadliest forms of cancers, namely your lung and pancreatic cancer. We believe that in addition to the testing, we will be able to come up with a method in which clinical laboratories will be able to detect this NNAL in the urine of patients or who have been exposed to cigarette smoking and to come up and assess the risk for development to certain forms of cancer, especially the lung and the pancreatic. There is an attempt already in diagnostic approach in proposing this specific biomarker as a possible routine method in determining the severity of one's smoking status through the assessment of NNAL may come be in effect. And lastly, in addition, it may be able to provide a clear perspective of one of the risks of one of the developing pulmonary conditions that could be danger to one's health. So it is also for the encouragement of smokers to cease tobacco usage and diagnostic monitoring of your patients. The scope of the study was all of covering your cigarette smokers and non-smokers. Our limitations are the following. Individuals that use tobacco and other alternatives, nicotine patch, marijuana, etc. will be excluded. All tobacco cigarette brands are covered in this research. The research design utilized in this research is based on a case-control design, given that the population was divided into two, namely your case group, which refers to that of the condition of the outcome of interest, and the control group, which does not have the outcome of interest. In this case, we have the current smokers and the non-smokers. Through the findings of this research, we will be able to provide a measure at the rate of urinary total NNAL among the population at risk for lung cancer, as well as to determine the minimum amount of urine NNAL measured to determine the likelihood of reversal mutagenesis in the lungs pertaining to the majority but not completely reversible. So we have designed the groups into current smokers, and in terms of the number of pack years, and non-smokers as totally not exposed to any form of cigarette smoking. So we have our inclusion-exclusion criteria. We have our sample sizes of 11 and our sample size of 11. We have come up also with our questionnaire, and the methodology will be basically the collection of urine specimen, and we had it run for mass spectroscopy and high-performance liquid chromatography. We have our dummy tables where the different groups, smokers were grouped into different pack years, and our controls, and we have the results as the following. So in conclusion, cigarette exposure have a direct relationship with the total NNAL levels. Secondly, pack years have proven to be a great method of measurement of life exposure to tobacco smoking. Pack years of coughing, redness, chest pain, and shoulder pain, hoarseness, and decreased appetite have proven to be manifest among individuals who have higher total NNAL in their urine. And baseline values are also consistent. And these are our recommendations. And these were the group that have done the research with my students. And as medical technologists, we believe that one of the basic roles of our profession is to induce harm reduction by detecting or coming up with effective and high sensitivity biomarkers that could assess severity of people who are exposed to cigarette smoking and then assess their risk for certain cancers. And we are ongoing to the study of also the same, but this time we're already including a group of e-cigarette users with my current students. With that, I'm reverting back the floor to my co-faculty, Jay Jasu, to discuss on future studies with the pharmacologic and toxicologic studies.
The initial research roadmap. This study will be conducted as part of our local literature, as far as the safety assessment of the electronic cigarettes are concerned. So basically, we will perform two studies. The first one would be the heavy metal blood determination, particularly on the assessment of the cadmium and lead levels among the smokers and e-cigarette users. So we will divide into 6 major groups. We have the control, non-smokers defined as less than 1 cigarette per day, smokers greater than 1 cigarette per day, and recently quitted smoking, which is they quitted 5 years ago without the intervention of cigarettes and electronic cigarette, smokers plus EC users, and EC users only. So each major groups will compose of 10 subjects. So for the expected research outcome, based on the previous literature, obviously cigarette smoking will really has an impact in increasing the blood cadmium level, at the same time the blood lead levels, because according to the study, these are the prominent heavy metals that could be determined in the blood samples of the human subjects. In dealing with the cigarettes, so we expect we will try to validate if the use of the e-cigarette will also decrease or increase this blood cadmium and lead levels. So on the second phase of our study, we have the genotoxicity assessment or the micronucleus test based on the OECD guidelines 474 for the testing of the chemicals. So we will use the test animals in order to determine if there is a genotoxic potential brought about by the e-cigarette juice. So we will inject 3 major components. So we have e-liquids with nicotine, e-liquids without nicotine, and then the mutagenic drug, the mitomycin C. So overall, we have this group of mice, and then will be subdivided into post 24 hours after the exposure of the e-cigarette juice. At the same time, e-cigarette juice without nicotine and the mitomycin as well. So during the in vivo micronucleus assay, we will harvest the femur of the mice. We will flush the bone marrow coming from the femur with the help of the fetal bovine serum. This will help us to determine if there is any genotoxic activity in the immature RBC as depicted in the mechanism of the in vivo micronucleus assay. For the expected research outcome, we want to validate if there is connection with the cigarette juice on the damaged DNA or the chromosomal changes in the peripheral blood, as this is anchored by Canistro et al. In the year 2017. So these are my research assistants who will conduct the micronucleus assay, my research assistants who will perform the heavy metal determination on the cadmium and the lead level. As a pharmacist, we want to tackle about the harm reduction program by dealing with the safety assessment before we proceed or before we give this to our consumer.
And also, as medical technologists, an effective and identified biomarkers in the urine and other body fluids of smokers could be a good assessment of evaluating their risk for cancers.
So this is our university in Manila. So we have the University of Santo Tomas. We would like to thank the Indonesia's Public Health Observer Organization for inviting us to give information on this information drive. At the same time, to the Vapors Philippines, headed by Mr. Tom Penlac, the President, for Dean Professor Alet Teresa Canay for allowing us to attend this very important symposium.
With that, we're very much happy and glad to be part of this as Filipino scientists, to be part of the harm reduction discussion in Jakarta. So with this, we say,
Terima kasih.
Good afternoon, everyone. I will try. I have 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Okay, so I'll try being a speaker when some have already spoken. Then it's a good situation because I can skip something. But what I thought I will share a scientist's view, because I'm not a clinician. I'm a basic scientist working in the field of cancer for a long time, but got interested in nicotine and smoking as a problem, because for India it's a big problem, and so I want to share my views here with you on this. I'm going to skip a lot of slides because many speakers have spoken, but we know that it's an acquired habit, widely practiced lifestyle factor, which is which is acquired, which essentially means it can also be quitted, and smoking can be prevented. We know the global prevalence is very high. Indonesia is one big country, a country with a big problem of smoking. India also, which is very close to Indonesia culturally and otherwise, has even a bigger magnitude of smoking and very complex situation. So what I thought that I will build up my talk based on some science that I understand from my own research and from research based on published data in this field, and try to look at the harm reduction as an option, and has technology, how technology can intervene and make a difference. So smoking, just briefly, even though it's a well-recognized health hazard, it affects the smoker himself or herself. It also affects others who are nearby, so second-hand smoking. And there is a third-hand smoking, an effect that is a recognized effect where the smoke chemicals settle down on everything else. So even if you are not a bystander to a smoker, you can get some chemicals emancipating from the smoke into your system and be affected. So it's a problem. Now, if you look at, I analyzed data from 90 countries from WHO published data in 2015, and categorized countries in three categories of low, middle, and high income countries. We know that the income levels make a difference to buying capacity and smoking capacity, also to awareness in the population in these three groups of countries. And if you look at this, these are data that are not mine, this is taken from WHO, but if you look at these box plots, that they are virtually the same. It doesn't matter, the prevalence of smoking remains the same in high, middle, and low income countries, irrespective of other facts. So in my perception, factors like price increase, awareness, making awareness of harmful effect of cigarette smoking, and all other factors have very, very small deterministic effect, if at all. There are other ways to deal with it. Now, tobacco is a produce of these beautiful plants. There are several species of it which is widely used. India produces a lot of tobacco. It's second largest tobacco producer in the world, so we are very badly affected. So what tobacco does? Tobacco, when we smoke it in form of tobacco, it produces three main categories of chemicals. Nicotine, the main one, which is the cause of addiction. Carbon monoxide, a gas which is because of partial combustion of carbon, the organic matter carbon. And tar, a very complex mixture of over 4,000 entities, essentially partially combust carbohydrates and free carbons, and they include a lot of carcinogens and toxins. Nicotine per se is addictive because it's an agonist to special receptors, acetylcholine receptor, and acts like normal hormones that are supposed to elevate moods and make the physiology run. So nicotine per se works exactly like normal hormones might do in our bodies. They work through the same channels and stimulate, so have a psychological impact because they stimulate the person feels energized and relaxed. It also kind of breaks the monotony of whatever one is doing, so it has a big psychological and physiological impact. and has a psychosomatic basis to this addiction. So it's not only physiological dependence, it's also psychological dependence on smoking per se, which leads to the craving and the sustenance of smoking in such huge populations as we see in the world. Now when I look at harm reduction, I find that the smokers, the current smokers, are maximally harmed people in the red zone. Those who turned former smoker, those who could quit smoking, are minimally harmed people. And in between comes the entire spectrum of people who could have difficulty in quitting. So harm reduction, in my perception, is that if you smoke 20 cigarettes and you reduce to 10 cigarettes a day for whatever reason, either psychological or with help, you have reduced the harm to 50%. And if you have quit 75% of smoking, then you are better off by 75%. So every cigarette that is left out is a gain to public health, and therefore, in my perception, harm reduction is also a continuum. So any effort and every effort that can reduce the harm is welcome. Now, I know as a biochemist and a scientist that quitting is not possible for everyone because, as I said, there is a physiological and there is a psychological aspect to smoking. So any other help that can give an option to these people who are not able to quit smoking and reduce the smoking extent to the extent it is feasible in that person, and it's very personal, everything is harm reduction and is welcome. We know, based on this philosophy, and we heard from many speakers earlier, that WHO proposes a lot of nicotine replacement options, but we also know from our experience, the theological experience, that this has not worked in last 50 or 60 years, and smoking continues to be a problem even though it shows some decline. So what can technology do? Can technology help here? Vaping, the electronic nicotine delivery system came into existence, and I'm going to skip all details except the fact that it contains liquid, as we heard already. Its atomization, electronic circuit converts liquid into an aerosol, which is basically micro droplets of solvent containing nicotine. It looks like vapor, as we know, and so it's called vapor device. And there are many other variants and improvements and innovations that have come into it. But basically, nicotine gets delivered as aerosol, so it's not a burnt product. It is not something which has come like smoking was done. And therefore it was visualized as something which can help quitting smoking because it provides nicotine, which is a physiological and psychological need. Process of vaping gives that psychological satisfaction that comes from smoking, and so complete psychosomatic satisfaction and almost insignificant health hazard. When we look at nicotine, just very quickly, it's a chemical, we heard about it also from other speakers, but it is not recognized as a carcinogen by IARC, the WHO organ for looking after chemical carcinogenesis, and they recognize only it as a weak promoter. It is not shown to be lethal. There is no human data, but we know from mice and rat and other large animal experimentation that it's toxic at very high doses, something which is not achievable by smoking. And we also know that in many neurodegenerative disorders, nicotine has been found medically very helpful. Nicotine does not stay in the body for long, and if we look at this very briefly, any toxin that goes into body is detoxified by our body system. Liver is the detoxifying organ for nicotine, and almost all nicotine gets converted into various other substitutes. Major chunk of it becomes codeine, which is shown in green, and virtually entire nicotine gets excreted out of body in a short time, except perhaps non-nicotine is one which is under 1% of nicotine that could be of some concern. I'll show you. Nicotine required in the body is delivered by cigarette smoking to the and vaping almost to the similar extent. So nicotine need of the body is met similarly, but excretion of nicotine from urine, we found based on our literature that it's little less in vapors than in smokers, which essentially to me means that nicotine urge will come very, very late. We also analyzed other constituents of smoke and that in vape, and I very quickly categorized the top 4 chemicals which are class 1 carcinogen. And if you can look at the relative amounts on the right side, in cigarette smoke it's much more than in vape. The same is true for carcinogens of lower category and even lower category, and everywhere you can see on the right scale, particularly those indicated in red, are several fold, sometimes several hundred-fold higher than what we find in vape. We continue, yes, we look at the same figure for other things, essentially indicating, and also for many other metal ions again in these 3 categories, essentially indicating that vaping has much less to insignificant amount of these cancer-causing agents than smoking, and so a fantastic option against it. So then we ask some question how we can it help, and we go on a forest analysis. I will skip the details, but when we look at former smokers and non-smoker taking vaping as a habit, e-cigarette as a habit, we find that most of the former smoker only take habit of smoking, of vaping, which means it is not addictive. We also analyzed whether the pattern of smoking is what kind in which countries, and countries where it is allowed and available, the smoking pattern is showing a declining trend on the left side as compared to countries where it is banned. So I conclude that ENDS or vape has minimum health and safety concerns compared to significantly high risk associated with cigarettes. So it has potential to be a good alternative to smoking. ENDS can potentially help quitting of smoking, and is a potential tool for harm reduction because it provides the same psychological and physiological solace that cigarette smoking does. And so it should be allowed, and the policy formulation should include create an environment where it's regulated but available to those who use it. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm sorry I'm a few minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Time to break to the scientist language. The focus for the application science and plain English language. Maybe next time bahasa Indonesia. At my talking about the clinician aspect, I'm the smoking cessation director in the hospital. I'm very interested about the tobacco-related disease. Every day, I treat the patient with the COPD, chronic obstructive lung disease, with the ischemic heart disease, cancers, renal disease. Every disease have a risk factor of the smoking. So if we wait, we can't win the disease. We have to go forward and cut off the harm. It is a scope of talking today in 2 sessions. The first 2 sessions is from the experience in smoking cessation clinics and what the patient tell us about the stop smoking. And the last 2 is the tobacco harm reduction in clinical medicine aspect. So the first, the patients walk into smoking cessation clinics. We classify them into 3 groups. We talk about the green group first. If the patient is already have a strong willing, intended to quit. So this group, maybe sometimes they don't need any interventions. They can stop by themselves. Intervention that we provide to this group is standard cessation treatment, the psychological treatment, the group treatment, direct calling, appointment every week, give the medication, and sometimes give the nicotine replacement therapy. But in the yellow one, is people not sure I quit or not, or the quit is benefit for me. I think this group is go on smoking and maybe tobacco harm reduction products is benefit. When he hesitated, quit or not, and maybe tobacco harm reduction product may be focused in this group in clinical medicine. And the last group, the red one, if the patient does not want to stop. So this group, if they smoke for the long time, they will get the harm. But if we switch to the tobacco harm reduction products or potential reduced exposure product in terms of the medicines, I think they can reduce the harm. And don't forget to go on the motivation to stop, to stop smoking. In clinical medicine, stop smoking, that means, like the Professor Pasarino said, don't driving the car. But the harm reduction is just use the safety belt. The tobacco harm reduction product may be benefit in 2 groups. The people that not sure, the people that never want to stop. To reduce the risk, it is proof, no doubtful about the risk reduction. But the cessation is still remain question. Is this product, it help cessation all of the tobacco products or not? In my country, we have a very strict law about the tobacco harm reduction products. So only we need is the nicotine replacement. Only we use is nicotine replacement therapy, nicotine gum, nicotine patch. As the previous panelist said, it doesn't work. So if the patient don't want to go to combusted cigarette smoke, what is their choice? We have no choice. Just only quit or die. We don't have the method of quit or not harm. The yellow one is the patient inside the cessation clinics. We use behavioral therapy. We use the psychological treatment a lot. Cessation medication, mostly nortriptyline, the lower potency one, because it is in the national drug list and very cheap. Sometimes, if the patient can afford, the medication is high price, varenicline or bupropion, we provide them too. And the top one, and the nicotine replacement therapy, we use a little bit in cessation clinics. But in the pink pyramid, the upside down pyramid, it is outside the clinics. Mostly, people outside the clinic don't want to go to the clinic, don't want to see the doctor, use nicotine replacement therapy, especially the tobacco harm reduction, or especially the electronic cigarette in Thailand. The medication, patient or another people think it is still harm, it is still toxin to the liver, still have toxin to the kidneys. They don't use it. Outside the clinic, we have a little bit social support. The people, the patient want to stop. Everybody knows smoking is harm. They want but harm. The government hospital Very organization, we have a little organization to deal with the social support, to help the patient to stop smoking. Many people use the top row one, the tobacco harm reduction products, but in Thailand it is totally illegal. In social media in Thailand, the patient and the people don't want to see the doctors, and the cessation clinics is hardly to access. They searching in the internet, they talk with the friends, and have the positive and negative data for tobacco harm reduction products. Positive data is it helps quit. It's totally safe. We have a lot of data about the harm reduction, about the chemical substance, and the thing cessation clinics is unnecessary from the social media, from the internet data. But for negative data, the tobacco harm reduction is totally illegal. We not enough data about clinical outcomes. We have a lot of data about surrogate outcome, as the former panelists in the morning or urine, NNAL, or cells metaplasia. We have a lot of data about surrogate outcome, but it is translate to clinical outcome or not still remains questions. And the negative data for maybe in Thailand government here mostly come from the government. You still addict. You just switch the addict device from combustible cigarette to electric cigarette. You still addictors. And the negative data is how about the second-hand smoker? It is safe or not? And in restricted area, can you smoke in that area or not? In Thailand, we have conflict data, no consensus. What should we do? This is going. We need more clinical outcome studies. We need trial and errors and report. But no words from experts, no words from the officers. We have tightly government control, totally illegal. It is in the dark, you can see the way. So the patient, the people fear about the tobacco harm reduction product because the data is very conflict. And this is the data from electronic cigarette use in Thailand. Thank you for Mr. Maris Ranjawat, web leader from Thailand. They use for stop combustible cigarette 80%. They need nicotines, but without smoke. The gateway problems, we prove that it is the small populations. Young people want to try, but the price of the electronic cigarette is still high in Thailand. Device is complicated, but cigarette in Thailand is very cheap and you can buy it everywhere. About the rising tax of the combustible cigarette is not affect to the vapors. And in fact, it's not affect to total numbers of patients who smokes because we have the illegal black market cigarette in lower price. So we need official and legal regulation because if we don't have official and legal regulation, we have the black market products maybe harm than the good one. In clinical medicines, the medications are the things that we believe it is safe in this issue. We should have rational medical science. That means it makes sense. Number two, we need clinical and evidence-based medicine, the good data to support the rational medical science. Number three, do no harm. The new products or the treatment, no harms in another way. The harms may be harm from the nicotines, harm from the smoke, harm from the toxicant, harm from the carcinogen, harm from the legal, harm from the price. but in Thailand, still harm in every way. Social acceptance. Many organizations, government organizations, make people smoke like disease. They look at the smoke. If you smoke, whether combustive cigarette or electronic cigarette, you are the sick people, have to treat. And this is the social concerns about if you use the vape, you don't look good for the rest of the people. And it is maybe your work, Dr. Fasalinos. The harm reduction we show in the all panelists said the electronic cigarette or nicotine gum, the tobacco harm reduction has reduced the toxic substance. And it is the same issue, reduce the toxic substance more than the combustive cigarette. Studies is concerned about the carcinogen, but we lack of evidence about cardiovascular disease, about the chronic bronchopulmonary disease, gastrointestinal disease. We need more information about this disease too, because the combustive cigarette is the risk of the cardiovascular disease, of the chronic pulmonary disease, not only cancers. And primary endpoint study, mostly in nowadays is the surrogate endpoint. We need the clinical outcome endpoints. And many studies have confounders and bias in methodologies. The smoking cessation is all the blue big circles, have a lot of method. But the tobacco harm reduction, the orange circle, still in the one of the method, need to declare safe or not more than today. And you see the next cigarette and harm. The cigarette is a big circle with the problems. If you use the new one to replace it, there's still a little bit toxicant remains. And the new substance, the propylene glycol, the aldehyde, it still remain questions, have to more research. So in clinical practice, I concluded the tobacco harm reduction is less toxicant than smoke. We need more clinical endpoints to translate the science to the clinical outcome. And we need more research about the new undetermined substance from the electronic cigarette. And in smoking cessations, as the former panelist said, the electronic cigarette or tobacco harm reduction is statistical significant, show reduce the number of cigarettes and increase the rate of smoking cessations. And for the smoking cessation is, the problem is the study in the first or second generation of electronic cigarette. We need to study about the newer generation of electronic cigarette or any harm reduction products. Electronic cigarette or another harm reduction product now is the options of the smoking cessation device. The limitation of the smoking cessation is mostly come from the cohort study, have a lot of bias and confounders. Mostly come from self-report and variable in products. First generation, second generation, and third generation is different. Conclusion for me is, for the research, we have to more research about the patient is intended to quit or unintended to quit, need more clinical trial, clinical outcome, need large and long-term cohort population to identify risk and benefit, toxin or not. And it is the question remains that conclusion, we need clinical outcome, we need to declare about the secondhand smoker, we need the long-term safety and combination with the standard treatment of smoking cessation today, and need meta-analysis to clarify the tobacco harm reduction is safe or not. Thank you.
Okay, allow me to share my experience and my investigation about e-cigarettes in Indonesia. Actually, I'm a dentist. I work in dental faculty, and my daily activities were teaching in University of Pajajaran, Bandung. And as I walk to my workplace every day, I discover that every 10 meters I can find a cafe vape. So, can you imagine if I walk for 2 kilometers, then you can find a huge number of vape or a cafe of vape. So, I was wondering what is actually happening in my neighborhood or surrounding. I live in Bandung, the capital city of West Java. I think about 4 hours by train from Jakarta. Here people know e-cigarette as rokok electric or the so-called Roderick. But recently they also call themselves vapers. Vapers came from vaping or vape. It is not legal, but I could not say that it is illegal because it is not currently regulated or monitored. And plenty of vape shops that I mentioned earlier, vape cafe and vapers in Indonesia. But I've never heard anyone being fined or having their devices or e-liquid taken away by officer or staff in Indonesia. And if you search at Tokopedia, Tokopedia is the most famous and largest online shops in Indonesia. You can search for 25,000 products available, including e-liquid, vaporizer, MOD, etc. And findings from 2011 and 2013 Global Adult Tobacco Survey, awareness of e-cigarette was 10.9% in Indonesia, and current e-cigarette use among those aware of e-cigarette is 2.5% in Indonesia. And awareness was higher among male, younger, more educated, and wealthier respondents. So I think it's more or less about upscale population in Indonesia. And marketing, awareness, and use electronic cigarettes or Roderick is growing very rapidly in Indonesia, despite no regulation and no monitoring. So the time is ticking. What can we do? This is one of the cafe of vape that I found near my neighborhood. So everything is available here. And as mentioned earlier by Professor Farsalinos, can we approve it as medication or medicine? It's a big mistake because they're just having fun. They even dancing baby shark. Yeah? So they are satisfied, happy, or maybe happier than before. So prior to commencement of the study, I did my desk research from Web Forum Indovapor. This is the Indonesia first personal vaporizer forum, followed by 121,000 members, more than 30,000 posts from 2012 up to February in 2017. And the vast majority of discussion in the forum was about the safety of Roderick, where to find the devices and the liquid, and how to fix or modify accessories. And they also post about complaints, how to use the e-cigarettes, how to do it yourself, liquid, and they say that they experience dry throat, difficulty in breathing, and chest pain and headaches. Therefore, YPKP, or the Indonesian Public Health Observer Organization, concerned with public health in Indonesia. So we carry out the research aimed to evaluate e-liquid ingredients written on the labels and their reaction to heating, observed oral condition among vapers, included clinical, microbiological, and histopathological assessment. And this was funded by Academic Leadership Grant, Universitas Padjadjaran, Bandung, West Java, where I work. And risk assessment of ASIC ingredients and their reaction to heating. We collect 9 bottles of e-liquid from Vape Cafe in Bandung, plus 1 heat stick as control or positive control, and assess for the content listed on e-liquid flavoring packaging, whether or not they are food grade. And also we assess the e-liquids by HPLC before and after heated by vaporizer to discover any new substances indicating degradation process upon heating. And the results, we discovered that the labels written in 9 samples of e-liquid claim that the ingredients used are food grade ingredients, including PG, vegetable glycerin, artificial or natural flavoring or sweeteners, and distilled water and nicotine. However, the result of high performance liquid chromatography reverse phase shows that the substance profiles of 7 out of 9 e-liquid samples underwent product degradation upon heating. An assessment of oral condition, I did it myself. Oral hygiene index was measured from 3 groups: non-smokers, conventional smokers, and vapers. Subsequently, microbiological samples were taken from oral mucus and from the gingival gravicular fluid. These were done by Ibu Hening Chaturina from oral biology department, and oral mucus were scraped for cytologic examination, and the slides were microscopically evaluated through a micronucleus assay test. And the results revealed that in non-smokers, 70% had good oral hygiene, while smokers and vapers had fair oral hygiene. Non-smokers harbor commensal bacteria, while in smoker and vapers, facultative anaerobe were predominant, and micronucleus as a predictive factor for tumoral degeneration were higher in conventional smokers compared to non-smokers and vapers. So I think this is still an ongoing research. We are still working on it. Okay, this is for me.
Terima kasih, Bu. This well-delivered presentation.
I have a comment concerning the presentations. You present a comparison between smokers, non-smokers, and vapors, right? But this does not mean that you are evaluating the effects of vaping. You are evaluating the effects of people who were smokers and have switched to vaping. Most likely. You didn't mention if the vapers included in your groups were former smokers who had quit with vaping. You know, there are 3 possibilities. There may be people who have never smoked in their lives and they just became vapers. There may be people who were smokers and switched completely, so now they don't smoke and they are vapors. And there may be people who are vapors but also smoke cigarettes. These are 3 very different groups. The only way of identifying what the e-cigarette causes is when you have people who have never smoked in the past and are now using e-cigarettes as the first product they are using. Otherwise, you are evaluating the effects in a former smoker, and you know very well that being a smoker and quitting doesn't mean that your risk or that physiological changes reverse immediately. So, when you present data on vapors, it is critical to report if these people were smoking before, if they have quit completely, and for how long they have quit completely. And if possible, have also an objective measure of quitting, because many people report that they have quit smoking, but they don't really. They may smoke 1 or 2 cigarettes per day, or they may be occasional smokers. So markers like, for example, exhaled carbon monoxide is a marker to identify at least daily use. If it's occasional use, still you will miss it. But it's very important because you found changes in the oral hygiene, and it was not that good in vapers as it was in non-smokers, right? But if these people were smoking for 10 years, 5, 15, and they quit for 6 months or for 1 year, you don't expect their oral health to be the same as non-smoker. So it is very critical when we report results to mention the past smoking history of vapers, and even more ideally, there must be another group of participants in these studies who are former smokers who have quit with other methods. This is the only way of comparing 2 different smoking cessation methods, one being the cigarette and the other being whatever else, medications, NRTs or something. But that's for future projects. For the projects that you have prepared now, I liked all the presentations and all the ideas, and the Professor Zazul has some more diverse projects which makes it even more interesting. But I think it is crucial when you present the results to have an accurate definition. I think Professor Zazul presented a questionnaire which I suppose has this purpose to have a detailed history of the smoking status before or after cigarette use. It is extremely important, and when you present the data, whether it's in a conference, like you have the poster with the oral hygiene, or in a publication, it is crucial to report the past smoking history and how this has changed, duration of quitting, patterns of cigarette use like consumption and so on, because you expect things like that to happen in someone who has quit recently, for example, or to someone who is still occasionally smoking or smoking very low number of cigarettes. So that's a suggestion. I like your ideas. They are very different but addressing the same thing. I like that you are using smokers as a comparison. You know that there are many studies which don't include the smoking comparison at all. I always think that the smoking group as a comparator is extremely important. So good luck, and I would suggest that you should publish your findings in scientific journals, in international scientific journals. That should be your goal, besides presentations in conferences. The scientific literature is basically defined by the peer-reviewed journals, and you have to target the publication there. Congratulations.
I would like, sorry, Dr. Amarit to respond first.
Thank you very much, Professor Varsalinos, for your comment and suggestion. Okay, I would like to explain. I leave it unexplainable, so it will raise question from the audience. So I think it's also my goal. For the smokers, the criterion or inclusion criteria is smoking about more than 5 years, and for the vapers, already switched for 1 year. But we cannot track history before that. And also for the oral hygiene index, there are also factors affecting the oral hygiene in somebody or in subject. For example, the technique and the frequency of brushing. So several years ago, an expert said that smokers had less compliance for brushing or maintaining their oral cavity cleanliness. But then John Beckstrom in 1996 said that if we give them or promote them adequate oral hygiene instruction, then the oral hygiene smokers and non-smokers will be the same. So for 12 months, I think John Beckstrom gave proper oral hygiene instruction, and they are just as excellent as non-smokers.
As for your comments and suggestion on the part of the heavy metal determination on the blood level. So it's very challenging for us because it's very difficult for us to delineate or to specify a group wherein this group is exclusively using e-cigarette. Well, in fact, some of these patients or participants might also use the combustible cigarette. So we will try our best to at least be specific on the profile of our participants. And I'm very glad that we are in a diverse practices, and we are very specific on our objective and the research objective, which is very related to our discipline. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
On tobacco, you would seem like the appropriate candidates to go on those delegations. I would suggest to you that you might wish to do that, and as I told you before, it is normal practice for government delegations to any multilateral international discussions in the WTO, in the World Health Organization, etc., to take experts with them. So I would suggest that you put yourselves forward and push them hard to potentially take you, because your views will be very relevant to them whilst they're discussing those issues. And I think, given the fact that most of the countries in this region are not, from what you've said, doing much on harm reduction, it seems to me a matter to remind them very strongly that while they are doing many of the things the FCTC is requiring, they are forgetting about the very important thing that is contained in there, which is the right to protect people's right to health, and that involves harm reduction. So if you have any comments on that, or you think that you have tried that and they have told you no, or it's something new to try, it'd be interesting to hear or share your views. Thank you.
Of asking the government to invite us with them. I'm skeptical as to what the government in Singapore might say to that. If I walked into the Ministry of Health's appropriate office, or the Foreign Ministry's appropriate office, or whoever actually carries that particular ball, and said, well, I'd like to join you guys, is that okay? I think, though, that what you have drawn attention to is that the governments actually do have to and are willing to listen if there is enough leverage behind the person who's speaking. For example, if we were to say to the Singapore government, you have a statutory or you have an international treaty obligation to do X or Y, I think they would get rather upset and they probably wouldn't listen. But if, on the other hand, I were to say, you guys are doing a fantastic job, and there are just a few things here that you might consider doing. I wonder if you'd allow me to come along with your delegation to talk about those few things that you might be considered doing, or to hear about how you're going to address those things. Then maybe, you know, we might have a better chance. We'd be talking about things like plain packaging, and we'd be talking about things that are more palatable to them, that are in or implied in the Framework Convention. But there's certainly an approach that we could take. I think it's a great approach. I'm going to have a go at that. I think I'll ask other lobbying groups to have a go at that and see if we can make some traction there.
So just to add to that, I agree totally. It has to be set in the country and cultural context of which one would do that. I guess I'm speaking from an Australian perspective where you would remind them of their right very directly, but in a different culture it would be a different approach. And I think also Indonesia ought to, there should be some way to remind Indonesia that it has a role there, like the United States as an observer government on this treaty, that they should be there. And I think it is truly a matter of working together there, not telling them what to do, but that brings them to hear the expert views that you have. And I have seen movement in some of those areas. In fact, the UK at COP7 was behind the scenes assisting many of the countries, Bangladesh and others, to understand these issues. And so having experts there can always be of value.
Yeah, I think India, we did try to voice the opinion in COP7, and I think Nilesh mentioned when he was talking, somehow it's not heard because for reasons that I think we discussed earlier, the policymakers and governments have some perception, some reasons, and they continue with that. I have personally written at least twice long scientific letters to the health minister in India, one who controls the policies in general in the country, and tried to also bring it out through the media to the attention of others. But you know, as scientific facts must reach, and that's what I think we discussed since the morning, that scientific facts, verifiable scientific facts, should be the basis of policies and the formulation of policies and the way forward. But somehow, at least in India, it has not worked. Of course, it did make a difference in COP7 that at least it was decided that, okay, there is something about e-cigarettes and there is some concept of harm reduction. And then we have heard little more noises, FDA and others also. But it's percolating very, very slowly, and maybe more scientific results come out. And also, I think media has a role to play in that it becomes more and more a campaign for general awareness. Perhaps then the policymakers will have to take note, and I think they, even if they understand for reasons other than science, they like to continue with what they are doing.
In the Philippines, in the year 2013, the Philippine FDA discourages the use of electronic cigarettes and any regulatory activities in relation to that. Then in this year, recently, the Department of Health, that's why President Rodrigo Duterte signed the executive order banning any tobacco products, and unfortunately, the electronic cigarette was included in that particular executive order. So, as of the moment, the Congress of the Philippines are now lobbying to include the electronic cigarettes as part of the harm reduction program. So that's I think that would be a good step in dealing with the use of the electronic cigarettes. And just like in India, so I think there will be a media or with the help of the media in order to disseminate this information, or in this electronic cigarette is a good harm reduction program in dealing with the smoking cessation program.
Okay, but please, before I think Mr. Da Rosa need.
Not forced, then we are appealing the government and FDA staff in Indonesia called BPOM. So we are asking over and over again, and we invite them to sit and discuss together with us this harm reduction treatment or therapy, and hopefully maybe not in a long time they will not ban the product. So I said that if you ban the product, then give us the option, the choice. So if some products or a product is banned, then what can we do to reduce the harm? Because with smoking, quitting smoking is very difficult, and they just cannot imagine how difficult it is. Hopefully, not in the long time, we'll be successful for it.
In fact, in Thailand, it's very unique from another countries. Totally illegal. So I think the patients or the people in Thailand that want to stop smoking have no choice. The first step is to regulate and bring it from the dark market, use the scientific data, use the scientific data of the harm reduction to the people. I use the data that if we replace the combustible tobacco cigarette with the tobacco harm reduction products, how we can help the people that cannot quit smoking, because as Padre said, quit smoking is really hard, but if we can reduce it, first step, I think in Thailand we should use the scientific data of harm reduction, not the police, not the government, not the politics, not the economics issue, but only the health issue, because of the big population of smoking in Thailand that can benefit if the harm reduction products is legal.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the audience?
But one of my major concerns when I was using electronic paper was the fluid was being used food, because I think most of the distributors were telling me that they were made from China. So China is not really known for its the quality of its product. So as a consumer, how will we guarantee that the fluid that will go into electronic cigarettes, will not be more harmful than the real cigarettes?
We discussed, it's very important therefore to have regulations in place and not banning. And of course cheap products come to consumer if they find their way. I think it's more damaging than any product can be. Therefore the governments or the policy makers have to look at it as a beneficial proposition, a step forward towards public health benefits. And once that concept comes in, then reasonable regulations will come in to ensure that good quality products come to the consumers at a reasonable price, and so on and so forth. So the issue, in my perception, it seems like first the policy makers and the governments have to recognize the potential benefits that these avenues offer to public health concerns. And once that happens, then things will follow.
But I can tell you that there is one region in the world which has regulation on liquid ingredients and their quality, and it's the European Union. So, for countries with no experience, I always suggest take the EU law, which says you are forced to use pharmaceutical grade ingredients. You are forced to provide to the authorities a full list of ingredients together with a toxicological risk assessment. You are forced as a producer of liquid to provide results of testing of the aerosol. And today, since May 2017, all the products available in the European Union have submitted a file with all this data to the European Union authorities. It's something that is not, on a theoretical level, and Professor Saran described the strategy behind that, but I'm giving you now a practical response of something that is already established as law concerning your question about the liquid ingredients. Already established in the whole European Union, 27 countries, and it is working. So there is something out there, in my opinion, it can be used even as is everywhere. There is no reason to change anything, but of course every country should look for their own specific characteristics and make adjustments. But it's something that has worked without being cost prohibitive. Companies don't need to spend millions for that, and it's quite reasonable. For example, saying that propylene glycol glycine should be pharmaceutical grade, which means the best possible quality, the same quality that is used in food products, the same quality that is used in medications, you can't expect anything better. There will be some uncertainties, as I discussed. The safety for inhalation, which is not clearly defined yet, although we don't have really evidence of any potential harm. But we need more. But what can be ensured, like what you said, we need to make sure that it's the highest grade purity. It can be ensured through the regulation. So it is something that exists today, it has worked, and of course it can work in every country.
Are those that are made from wood?
No,
liquids. Right. There's a lot of backyard industries creating liquids. The estimate that we have is nationwide. There's probably around 2,000 different makers. Because you actually see juices, liquids that can only be found in a specific locality and not elsewhere. Initially, yes, a lot of the liquids were being imported from China. There are some producers, brewers, that actually use nicotine coming from China. The premium ones, which actually cost 2 times the normal rate, actually uses nicotine and materials coming from the US.
Why policymakers in many countries where smoking is a major issue, and as was pointed out earlier, particularly in South Asian countries where health support system is not strong enough and not adequate, large enough to meet the entire population's needs. And then of course complexities, cultural and others. In India, for instance, we have smoking, not only of cigarettes, but varieties of local forms of cigarettes that scientifically is more harmful, but perceived as a safer alternative. And then of course smokeless tobacco and areca nut and betel nut and so many. So it's a major issue, and I don't have a simple direct answer why policymakers have not been able to get convinced on it. It's a socio-political complex and economics issues. Countries where the thought process is more, and I think developed world, we see European Union, we see Australia, New Zealand, many other. We saw the example from Jenny's presentation that many countries are moving forward. Others are changing their stance and becoming more positive and open to harm reduction. I guess we have to do, and that's what I said at one point in time, I think twice today, that media has a very important role to play in bringing out the messages in a positive environment. And harm reduction in every field is recognized, and why not here? And I'm optimistic. In India also we have major problems. Some states have banned completely, so it has become illegal like in Thailand. But fortunately the whole country it's not illegal yet. And we have to bring out these scientific facts. And I think another point that was made earlier, that to convince local governments, is very important to bring out local research outcomes. Because At least I and Dr. Konstantinos have started a study together to first assess the extent of e-cigarette prevalence and feedback from the population. So it becomes very local, fundamental study that can convince, and then follow up other for the local, because there is of course a genetic component too. So different, by and large, all harm reduction will work everywhere fine, but there will be differential responses because of different gene pools. So local research is required, and maybe that will be the step forward, and these positive aspects have to be brought out to the attention of public and policymakers through media and through such interactions. Thank you.
Any additional comments from you guys? Okay, Professor Sison. Professor Sison first. Thank you.
In fact, I agree with professors. We different in genes pool. We different in cultures. So the first thing is that all the government should be open-minded and make the local research to find out the tobacco harm reduction products is safe or harm to Southeast Asian populations.
Okay, please.
In addition to the FDA regulation mentioned by Professor Jesus here, our government in the Philippines have made drastic moves, like we have what we call the sin tax. We have imposed higher taxes for liquors and cigarettes so as to discourage those smokers and patronizing the alcoholic beverages, so as to discourage them. But that does not necessarily translate to people resorting to e-cigarette, because again, it is also costly and it's purely economics. It's really very expensive in the Philippines for them to be discouraged from taking cigarettes, but then resort to e-cigarettes. Is very expensive. And another cultural factor in the Philippines is that the retail factor, those who weren't able to buy a box of cigarettes can just buy it around 2 to 3 sticks. So even though they impose high taxes, the retail culture in the Philippines, they could get through with having cigarette by just buying 2 to 3 cigarettes per day. So those are the certain factors that could affect and make it difficult for Filipinos to resort to e-cigarettes, no matter how good the effects and the results of researches in the Philippines.
Okay, Dr. Ramalia.
Last but not least, there has been unbalanced communication between scientists and government, or maybe media or press. Then maybe, hopefully after today, there would be well-informed government, public, and papers that e-cigarette or any method are a gateway to stop smoking, not to start smoking.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to conclude our session. Even though there are still a room of improvements and room of studies for detailed research to support the tobacco harm reduction products, but available scientific evidence already a good starting point for the policymakers to formulate or to design wise and supportive policy for the tobacco harm reduction products circulations. So now it's time for us to help them, also to help to increase the social awareness and to attract the governmental attentions once again, because it's very crucial for them to make a good foundations of regulations. So that's all for this session. I would like to thanks for all the presenters, and I ask for the audience to give once again warm applause for them.
Come to the end of the first Asia Harm Reduction Forum in Jakarta, Indonesia. Let's give a big round of applause to all the panelists and participants present here today. And since this morning, we have heard from experts, academicians, scientists, and consumer associations discussing about the development of tobacco harm reduction in Asia. The demand for a safer alternative nicotine and tobacco product is real, and growing significantly. The scientific findings to date have also shown convincing results that these products can be the solution to global smoking epidemic. Therefore, policymakers must be cautious in regulating the product. Simply banning it will rob smokers from the opportunity to have a less harmful product that can meet their nicotine needs. Regulation must be based on scientific evidence with the spirit of promoting public health. I sincerely hope that the discussion today will inspire everyone as we go back to our own country and profession on the role that each of us can play to further promote tobacco harm reduction in the region. My fellow scientists and academicians, let's pioneer more research and studies on alternative nicotine and tobacco products to help the policymakers in formulating the best regulations. Together, we can make a difference. Lastly, I would like to say on behalf of YPKP, it has been a great privilege for us to host such a high-level regional event discussing about an issue that is particularly crucial for Indonesia, home to one of the world's largest smoking population. The benefit of harm reduction for this country will be immense in terms of public health as well as reducing social and economic costs associated with smoking. Having said that, I would like now to invite on stage Mr. Azrul Hafiz bin Zainuddin from Malaysian Organization of Faith and Piety, MOF, to advance tobacco harm reduction in the region. Once again, thank you to all participants and panelists who have taken the time to attend today's forum. Have a safe travel and good evening.
It's really honored. We'll be hosting the second Asia Harm Reduction Forum next year. So we hope for your support and I'll see you guys next year. Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.